Merry Christmas, my intrepid travelers of the internet. It's that time of year again when we get together with loved ones and exchange gifts to celebrate this wonderful holiday season. But in the midst of all this cheerful annual chaos that is Noel, it got me thinking, why do we celebrate Christmas? Where did that even start? How long ago was that? There must be so much rich, fascinating history in something as big as Christmas, right? And so I began looking. And let me tell you, before I even scratched the surface, I realized just how right I was. And as I kept looking, I realized Buck-EEs laboratory would be the perfect place to share such an exciting intellectual endeavor. That's right up our alley at what we do here. So come along with me as we trek on an exciting adventure throughout history to discover the origins of our Christmas tradition. What do you mean you don't want to go? Well, that just took the wind right out of my sails. I had like a whole thing. But you know what? You're going to be intellectually curious and you're going to be fucking happy about it. To truly understand Christmas, we have to go way back in time, long before the Christmas tree and the jolly old man in the red suit. As a matter of fact, many experts would agree that the origins of Christmas can stretch as far back as the Neolithic period. That is to say, about 7,000 to 1700 BCE, as according to the Smithsonian Archives website. These prehistoric celebrations often took place around the midwinter solstice, the winter solstice being the shortest day of the year, falling generally on the 21st of December. For millennia, people have recognized this time of year with rituals and celebration. It also was extremely important to a group of people that you probably haven't heard of, but you almost certainly know about what they did. I am no less than referring to the people who built and used Stonehenge, with its tallest stone lining up with sunrise in midwinter on the shortest day of the year. Archaeologists working at the nearby Durrington Walls had discovered that these Neolithic or New Stone Age people held great feasts right there at around this time of year. They ate huge quantities of pork and beef, some of it from animals derived from hundreds of miles away. They also enjoyed fermented dairy products like milk and cheese, and probably drank things like barley beer or mead, that honey beer that gained its popularity from the ever-so-valiant Vikings. They consumed these adult holiday beverages from elaborately decorated beakers, a late Neolithic must-have accessory. They also practiced everybody's favorite part of the holiday, gift giving. The most valued midwinter presents would have included things like daggers made of bronze being the new popular material that just started to replace stone and flint for making things like tools and weapons. These things were probably imported from places like Europe, where metalworking technology had gotten off to a head start, to say the least. The richest people's party outfits included things like gold necklaces or golden hair decorations or gold buttons to fasten their clothes together. I would say that would beat the hell out of an ugly sweater contest. Sign me up for the gold hair decorations. They might also have sung songs, played bone flutes, and jumped over bonfires in honor of the sun, encouraging him, specifically him, to return to make the days longer once again. Fast forward only, about 2,000 years, and we find ourselves in a rather popular destination, both in ancient and modern times, Rome. Perhaps you've heard of it. Since its humble beginnings and legendary foundation in 753 BCE by Romulus and Remus, Rome has always been a pagan kingdom, republic, and eventually, expansive empire. Massive temples dedicated to pagan gods like Jupiter and eventually deified emperors could be found in any Roman town. Whilst being one of the most recognizable ancient civilizations to us in the modern world, pre-Christian Rome also knew how to throw down in the mid to late December with parties and festivities that would put most of our modern Christmas parties straight to shame. Saturnalia, the most popular holiday on the ancient Roman calendar, derived from older farming-related rituals of midwinter and the winter solstice, especially the practice of offering gifts or sacrifices to the gods during the winter sowing season. The pagan celebration of Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture and time, began as a single day, but by the late Republic of 133 to 31 BCE, it had expanded to a weeks-long festival beginning December 17th. On the Julian calendar, which the Romans used at the time, the winter solstice fell on December 25th. It was a time when all the usual rules of rank and etiquette were overturned, slaves were served at meals by their masters, and everyone wore a pileus, the conical cap of liberty worn by slaves when they were eventually freed. Gambling with dice, which was usually forbidden, was allowed, and instead of togas or dresses, people wore bright, flashy party clothes. Public feasts were followed by celebrations at home, and people exchanged small gifts, especially things like sigillaria or laria, little figures made out of wax or pottery, or jokingly satirical presents, or even songs or poems. Slaves could even criticize their masters, and just this once a year, got the day off. During Saturnalia at House Steed's Roman fort, soldiers may have been served by their officers. They'd have varied their everyday diets of bread and beef with some luxury foods the Romans introduced to Britain, such as figs, dates, pine nuts, snails, fattened up dormice, and garum, a strong-tasting fish sauce made from fermented fish. Instead of the usual Hadrian's Walls beer, they would have drunk imported wine, perhaps Mulsum, blended with honey and spices. Jumping over to Scandinavia in the early 1st century, the Norse, better known as the earlier mentioned Vikings, were celebrating Yule, a 12-day winter festival that once again marked the winter solstice. With feasting, drinking, singing, games, sacrifices to the gods and ancestors, Yule was a time to bring light into the dark winter and to prepare for the return of spring. Yule is one of the oldest known and documented winter solstice festivals we still celebrate today, and many of its traditions would merge with early Christianity to eventually become the Christmas we celebrate today. One of the most prominent traditions that they had was the Yule tree, basically boiling down to decorating an evergreen tree with food, clothes, and small statues of Norse gods. The statues representing a word I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce,
Yggdrasil,
roughly translating to the Great Ash Tree. This tradition inspired the Christmas tree. The Vikings would also decorate the area with holly, mistletoe, dried leaves, and fruit. Starting to sound a little familiar, isn't it? They would also offer gifts. The Vikings would offer things to the powers that they thought protected them, such as ancestors, protective spirits, or other deities. I understand that the whole offering gifts to deities thing doesn't really sound like a part of our modern Christmas traditions, but we are also the ones who leave out milk and cookies for a several hundred-year-old saint, who sometimes is depicted as a jolly old elf in the hopes that he thinks that our attitude has been acceptable enough that he decides to leave a couple of cute gifts underneath our modern version of a Yule tree, instead of a lump of coal inside of our musty moth-bitten foot garments that we're supposed to hang over the fireplace like it's some sort of war trophy. But let's be honest with ourselves, how many of us even really have a fireplace anyway? I digress. You get the point. During this time, the Vikings would also offer sacrifices, sacrificing animals to the gods, especially Thor, and to the dead. They would eat the meat at a banquet, or sometimes leave it out, just lying out on the ground, as an offering. Ceremoniously, they would burn the trunk of the Yule tree, making oaths to one of their deities Frey over a large boar, drinking the previously mentioned mead, and burning candles every night during Yuletide. They would also burn fragrant incense such as bay, juniper, cedar, pine, or rosemary. You can most definitely see the influence that these people had, as most of their practices have been enveloped into ours. Moving forward through history to the early days of Christianity, and things start to get even more interesting. The precise origin of assigning December 25th as the birth date of Jesus is unclear. The New Testament provides no clues in this regard. December 25th was first identified as the date of Jesus' birth by Sextus Julius Africanus in 221, and later it became the universally accepted date. One widespread explanation of the origin of this date is that December 25th was the Christianizing of the
Dies Solis Invicti Nati,
Day of the Birth of the Unconquered Sun, a popular holiday in the Roman Empire that celebrated the winter solstice as a symbol of resurgence of the sun, the casting away of winter, and the heralding of the rebirth of spring and summer. Now yes, I want to point out that we did just talk about the Romans and how they celebrated Saturnalia, and nothing about the aforementioned
Dies Solis Invicti Nati.
Bucky, what the hell? Well,
Dies Solis Invicti Nati
refers specifically to Birthday of the Unconquered Sun, a Roman festival celebrating specifically the winter solstice and the sun's return to power, whereas Saturnalia is a separate, broader Roman winter festival celebrating specifically the god Saturn. So there's the difference. There's just so much that goes into the history of a civilization that lasted arguably about 1300 years that I'll just never be able to fit every single little thing into this video, or it will never end and my head will literally explode. After December 25th had become widely accepted as the date of Jesus' birth, Christian writers frequently made the connection between the rebirth of the sun and the birth of the sun. One of the difficulties with this view is that it suggests a nonchalant willingness on the part of the Christian church to appropriate a pagan festival when the early church was so intent on distinguishing itself categorically from pagan beliefs and practices. It is the consensus of many historians that this was a particularly clever move to help convert pagans to Christianity by offering them a Christian alternative to the solstice celebrations. A second view suggests that December 25th became the date of Jesus' birth by a priori reasoning that identified the spring equinox as the date of the creation of the world, and the fourth day of creation, when the light was created, as the day of Jesus' conception, i.e. March 25th. December 25th, 9 months later, then became the date of Jesus' birth. For a long time, the celebration of Jesus' birth was observed in conjunction with his baptism, celebrated January 6th. Christmas began to be widely celebrated with a specific liturgy in the 9th century, but did not attain liturgical importance of either Good Friday or Easter, the other two major Christian holidays. Roman Catholic churches celebrate the first Christmas Mass at midnight, and Protestant churches have increasingly held Christmas candlelight services late in the evening of December 24th. A special service of lessons and carols intertwines Christmas carols with scripture readings narrating salvation history from the fall in the Garden of Eden to the coming of Christ. The service, inaugurated by E.W. Benson and adopted at the University of Cambridge, has become widely popular. We move ahead approximately 800 years, and we land ourselves in medieval England. By the Middle Ages, Christians were celebrating the remarkable event of Jesus' birth with an extended season that began with Advent, 4 days before Christmas, and continued for the 12 days after Christmas up until Epiphany on January 6th. The time preceding Christmas used to be a solemn time of fasting, whereas the days after Christmas were the time of celebration. Christians looked forward to the midnight Mass of Christmas Eve with great anticipation, because it was the service that marked the transition from fasting to feasting. The service, known as Christ's Mass, eventually became a description for celebrations of Jesus' birth throughout the world. The word Christmas has its origin from the Old English term Christ's Mass, and over time it evolved into the one word we all know and use today. These traditions included the Yule log, kept burning throughout the season, decorating houses with little evergreens, and eating richly decorated boar's heads, sometimes washing it down with a little mulled braggot, which is extra strong ale mixed with honey and cinnamon, oftentimes spiked with a little brandy. Boisterous medieval festivities were directed by a Lord of Misrule, whose word was law. The Christmas games he ordered could be rough. Among the tamest was hot cockles, where blindfolded victims had to guess who'd slapped them from behind. If the guess was right, the slapper became the victim. Blending devotion with drunken partying, medieval Christmases were also important state occasions, when kings ceremoniously wore their crowns at feasts and law-givings. Henry II, who built the Great Tower at Dover Castle, held Christmas crown wearings at 24 different places during his 34-year reign. The Christmas we know today took shape in Victorian times, when the rowdier celebrations of earlier periods were toned down into a quieter, more family-focused festival. Queen Victoria and her beloved Albert, with their 9 children, played a big part in these changes. The Christmas trees Albert popularized from his native land of Germany in 1840 rapidly caught on, as did decking them with lights and presents, by now given on Christmas Day itself. Victorian children's presents were usually quite modest, such as sweets, nuts, or oranges, although wealthier kids might hope for a gift echoing the latest technology, such as a toy train. Christmas box tips to servants and tradesmen were left until the 26th of December, hence calling it Boxing Day. Many other now familiar elements of Christmas also originated in this time period, such as mailing out Christmas cards, eating Christmas crackers, or eating turkey rather than the traditional goose. Most Victorian families went to church at Christmas, and the words, if not always the tunes, of many popular carols including Good King Wenceslas, Once in Royal David City, and O Come All Ye Faithful are Victorian. Better off people also provided gifts for Christmas feasts for poorer neighbors, a tradition promoted by Charles Dickens's 1843 Christmas Carol, Scrooge Story. And parties for tenants' children were an annual Christmas event at mansions like Broadsworth Hall. And whilst we are here in the 19th century, now is a perfect time to bring up the man, the myth, the legend himself, Santa Claus. Santa Claus, a jolly figure known for delivering gifts to children on Christmas Eve, has roots in many traditions. His story begins with St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop from Myra in what is now modern-day Turkey. Formerly known as Sinterklaas, and known for his generosity and kindness, especially towards children. St. Nicholas is accredited with a wide variety of miracles. In one story I found, he resurrected 3 youth after being murdered and pickled in a barrel by an innkeeper. I'm not kidding, that was an actual story that was told. Now, whether it's true or not, I'll allow you to decide. In another story, there was a very poor man who was literally on the brink of selling his own daughters into slavery. Under the cover of darkness, St. Nick threw 3 bags of gold down the chimney, and then on its way down, the bags of gold landed in their stockings, which were drying out over the fire. St. Nicholas's fame spread throughout medieval Europe after his relics were quote-unquote rescued from Myra and taken to Italy in 1087. Over time, tales of his gold-giving exploits gave rise to a tradition of leaving gifts for children on the night before the 6th of December, which was St. Nicholas's Day. In the Netherlands, special markets sprang up to sell toys and treats for the occasion, and St. Nicholas or Sinterklaas impersonators dressed in red bishops' costumes to delight the crowds. Tradition had it that, in his quest to deliver presents, St. Nicholas would enter houses by passing through locked doors or descending down chimneys for leaving gifts in shoes and stockings. Sinterklaas came under attack during and after the Reformation. With Protestants keen on moving away from veneration of the saints, the baby Jesus was promoted as a more appropriate giver of gifts, known in Germany as Das Christkindl, later angelicized as Kris Kringle. St. Nicholas markets were banned, as were biscuits baked in the shape of the bishop. Bishop biscuits. We gotta bring those back. But it's clear that the popular traditions survived. One famous depiction is Jan Steen's 17th century painting of the Feast of St. Nicholas, which shows a chaotic domestic Dutch scene of gift-giving and feasting. Further evidence of their survival came in the expansion of the Sinterklaas universe, which began to incorporate a range of characters that were scary and frightening, which were intended to scare the absolute daylights out of ill-behaved children. Some of these characters included Krampus, Old Man Whipper, Rough Nicholas, Furry Nicholas, and Farmhand Rupert. Now, it's not entirely clear how Sinterklaas made his way across the Atlantic to North America to become Santa Claus, but it's entirely possible that the story made its way to the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, which would eventually become modern-day New York. In 1809, Washington Irving's History of New York claimed that the old Dutch family still told tales of Sinterklaas on St. Nicholas's Day. He was said to fly over the city in a wagon and climb down chimneys to deliver presents. Now, whether or not Irvine was using poetic license is unclear, but the idea stuck and the legend grew, with a poem featuring Sancte Claus published in the New York Spectator a year later. Some historians think that Irving and other New Yorkers were inventing new traditions in order to create a gentler, more family-oriented kind of Christmas in the city, which had begun to experience increasing rates of drunken mob violence around the 25th of December. In 1821, an anonymous illustrated poem called Old Santa Claus with Much Delight introduced Santa's red coat, reindeer, and sleigh, and put his arrival on Christmas Eve rather than St. Nicholas's Day. 2 years later, Clement Clark Moore, a professor of Hebrew in the city, embellished the legend in his poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known to us as The Night Before Christmas. In it, St. Nick got his bushy beard and a whole herd of magical flying reindeer. His appearance was decidedly not that of a Dutch bishop, but instead he was a right jolly old elf with clothes all tarnished with ashes and soot, twinkling eyes, merry dimples, and a beard as white as snow. Other writers and artists added new layers to the legend, and gradually, Santa Claus took over from St. Nicholas. For several decades of the 19th century, he took a variety of forms. Tall and short, fat and thin, his robes a rainbow of colors. Even in 1863, a cartoonist named Thomas Nast depicted him dressed in the Stars and Stripes, speaking to Union troops during the American Civil War. Nast eventually did more than any other artist to set the standard for Santa's classic look. By 1881, Nast had perfected his vision of Santa as seen in his Merry Old Santa Claus. His illustrations for A Visit from St. Nicholas were hugely popular, and he introduced the world to Santa's workshop, as well as the notion that his base of operations could be found at the North Pole. While we're here, it is worth pointing out the idea that Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus is a total fabrication. Those fizzy pop pushers did not start using him in their adverts until the 1930s. Historians think that Santa Claus first stepped foot in England in 1864, when he featured alongside Father Christmas in a story by the American author Susanna Warner. In her tale, Santa Claus brought gifts, while Father Christmas appeared in a mummer's play. And there's evidence that in the 1860s, other beings, such as fairies, were responsible for clandestine Christmas gifts. But the new legend of Santa Claus soon displaced the fairies, much to the confusion of English folklorists in the 1870s, who were at a loss to explain the emerging tradition. One, a Mr. Edwin Lees, wrote in a letter to Notes and Queries in 1879,
"On Christmas Eve, when the inmates of a house in the country retire to bed, all those desirous of a present place a stocking outside the door of their bedroom, with the expectation that some mythical being called Santa Claus will fill the stocking or place something within it before morning. From what region of the earth or air this benevolent Santa Claus takes flight I have not been able to ascertain."
By the 1880s, Santa Claus had almost completely merged with Father Christmas and was popular across all parts of the country. The Oxford Dictionary of English Folklore notes that a French visitor to England in 1883 said it was a matter of common knowledge that Father Christmas came down chimneys to put toys and sweets in stockings. By the end of the century, Punch magazine was depicting Father Christmas not up to date as the old food-focused figure of the past, and Father Christmas up to date as a much more modern figure dashing through the snow on a car carrying a box full of toys. The Old English Father Christmas was now Santa Claus in all but name. Despite being invented by Dutch immigrants in New Amsterdam hankering for old traditions, the new Santa Claus was exactly the type of figure that the Victorians needed for their new family-friendly, family-oriented Christmas. Which now brings us full circle back to the Victorian era.
There, all caught up.
As we've already established, the Victorians did more than anybody else to give us our modern Christmas. For them, Christmas was a time for children, charity, and religion. There was no more room for the drunken, party-fueled racket that once was. As the 19th century wore on, new traditions were imported, invented, and reinvented to support this tamer, domesticated Christmas. Prince Albert and Queen Victoria popularized the German Christmas tree. Gift-giving shifted to Christmas from New Year's. Tom Smith invented the Christmas cracker. Mass-produced cards were sent across the country and around the world, and carol singing enjoyed a renaissance. The Old English Father Christmas loved a good party, but the Victorians needed more from him than that. Generous, jolly, and dedicated to children, Santa Claus was the ideal character for their new version of Christmas, just as he was for the New Yorkers who did so much to shape his legend earlier in the century. To conquer the English imagination, he just needed to assume a more familiar name. Whatever we call him, he continues to dominate the popular culture of Christmas around the world, and he is showing no sign of slowing down. For millennia, we humans have been getting down and all around the same time of year. Christmas, whatever the name, has been celebrated by countless different people in countless different ways. Christmas always has been and always will be forever changing, being morphed by the inevitable differences in politics, religion, technology, and taste. But you know what? I think, since the very beginning, since the very start of it all, the goal has remained the same. It is a time for everyone, no matter the differences in background or beliefs, political stance, to come together, to truly set aside our differences, albeit for so little time, and just truly take in the fact and appreciate that we all exist here at the same time, in the same moment. And I think that is the true meaning of Christmas. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you to every single person who decided to come on this journey with me. And I want you, wherever you are, to have the most Merry Christmas and an even happier New Year. Bye. Woo! Do 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 do. Ooh 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 ooh. Ooh 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 ooh. Ooh 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 ooh. Ooh 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 ooh, ooh, ooh.